No? Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome, everyone, and welcome especially Professor Manish Raizada from University of Guelph, Canada, who will be our speaker for the webinar today. This webinar series has been ongoing for some time and is brought to you by School of Agriculture at UM6P, RUFORUM, and OCP Africa. And today I would be your host, joining also from OCP North America. And the topic for today's webinar is opportunities for AgriScience collaboration within Africa. So very relevant to this group. And Professor Manish has kindly agreed to speak about this. This is his passion. He also teaches courses in African agriculture, especially for smallholders. Professor Manish, welcome. And we'll have a brief chat before we go actually to your webinar.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation.
Good morning. I can hear you. Yes. Glad to see you. Yeah. So people will be, joining for a few minutes. So in the meantime, we can have a brief chat. So really, Manish, last time we met was at UM6P, actually, early part of the year, before COVID happened, and we were there together, both of us. So for the benefit of the audience, both I and Manish are affiliated with UM6P in some capacity, helping to develop the agrobiosciences program at the School of Agriculture UM6P. So we were together, I think, in February this year for the high-level scientific committee review of the various programs. So it was a very productive meeting, and now it's a virtual visit to Manish.
We never thought we would be in this world.
Yeah, it's unprecedented times, but this is a new normal. So Manish, tell us about your passion for smallholders wherever they are in Africa or in Asia or elsewhere. How
Yeah. Well, so I was born in India, and my early childhood was in West Africa and Nigeria, and then we moved to Canada. And when I was in high school, there was a terrible famine in Ethiopia, and it was the first televised famine. And I was 16 years old at the time, and it had a huge impact on me. And I think right then, because of those three experiences, I guess, or those three parts of my life, I realized I wanted to devote my career to somehow helping in this problem, and I was always interested in genetics. And so ultimately, I became a plant geneticist. And some years later, I tried to figure out how will I actually help smallholder farmers. And so we came up with this concept of sustainable agriculture kits. And so that is half of what my group does. And essentially it's a menu of products. These are tools, low-cost seeds, extension materials, etc. And these are products for purchase, typically about $1 US. And the idea is, for this menu, is to create options for smallholder farmers. So, and I teach today at the University of Guelph, which is in Canada. I teach 2 courses on African smallholder agriculture. So to me, it's a real privilege to be able to work with smallholder farmers and other partners who work with smallholder farmers. So that's my background.
Wonderful. Really greatly appreciate your service to the smallholders, globally. So Manish, I also visited your university last year, remember, in connection with the conference on biology, and I think the 10 or 11 societies of Canada kind of had a joint meeting. So it was a great occasion, and you were kind enough also to arrange my meeting with your Dean of Agriculture and Associate Dean, so which I really enjoyed. And I got the impression that they're very keen to collaborate internationally, especially Africa. And I also understand that you have a role as international agriculture, international relations officer.
That's correct. So for the audience that is not aware of Guelph, the University of Guelph is located about 1 hour from Toronto in Canada. It's Canada's oldest agricultural university, founded in the late 1800s. And one of the missions of the university is internationalism. It's one of the 3 pillars is internationalism. And that's why I'm very happy to be a faculty member there. And so we have different schools. We obviously have schools of agriculture. We have a veterinary school. We also have a separate international development school. And the faculty at Guelph have collaborations around the world. There certainly is a very strong interest in Africa. I'm always pleasantly surprised how many faculty at Guelph have collaborations in Africa. And I'm also really pleased how many African graduate students and fellows that we have at the university. I hope that will continue to grow. And in fact, in the 1950s and 60s, Guelph faculty were seconded in different parts of Africa. And I know amongst our alumni, for example, later was a Minister of Agriculture of Tanzania. I remember traveling in Ghana and West Africa and seeing University of Guelph stickers, bumper stickers on cars. And that comes from that era in particular. I think for some years the university stopped being engaged internationally because of funding reasons, but luckily that has changed now. So I think the university welcomes partnerships and students from across the world, but certainly and especially Africa.
Yeah, I think it's a great linkage, right? University of Guelph with Africa. And I will strongly encourage, the students and the faculty within Africa to engage with one of the very prominent universities in agriculture, University of Guelph in Canada. I hear a lot about their agriculture programs, and they're ranked quite highly globally in agricultural research and education. So it's great, Manish, that you are here, and and your affiliation with UM6B and with Africa in general. So it's great, and I hope people after your seminar, people can connect more, and your role being as an international relations officer also can help facilitate interactions or fostering collaborations. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So how's the weather in? Did I lose?
No, we can see you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So how's the weather in Guelph?
Well, people may be surprised that at least in southern Canada, I'm in southern Ontario near Toronto, that we have very extreme weather. Everyone is aware that Canada is cold in winter and has snow and ice, and it can be certainly minus 20 degrees in January. But they may be surprised to know that in the summer, it's very hot, and climate change is making it hotter. So today, actually, it will feel like 42 degrees Celsius today. So we are having a heat wave right now. But our normal summer temperature might be around 30 degrees Celsius. And in the winter, it can be 0, minus 10, minus 20. We have lots of extreme weather here. And just like all over the world, of course, we know that parts of Africa, the climate is changing. I know in South Asia, the climate is changing. Lots of extreme weather events. So it's very hot, and I'm happy to report that I'm underground today. I'm in the basement where it's the coolest part of the house.
So Manish, you are well acclimated to the extremes of weather and climate, right?
Well, I should be after so many decades, but I feel like I'm not. So I like to live in a comfortable zone of, I would say, 10 to 25 degrees Celsius. To me is comfortable. I lived in California for many years where I did some studies, and the weather there was perfect. I often wish I was still there, but this is my home. You know, I'm often envious of people, researchers in certain parts of Africa, especially those who are in the highland capitals, for example, in East Africa, how pleasant the weather is. I think people in the West sometimes think all of Africa is very, very hot, and of course people in Africa, in different parts of Africa, know that's not the case, and you can have very nice temperate weather in Addis Ababa or the different capitals, especially in East Africa. And so I'm often envious of that climate, and I wish I was there, especially in the winter.
Yeah, and you may be envious where I am in North Carolina, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. I am envious where you are in North Carolina. I mean, the wonderful thing, there's many wonderful things about Canada. It's a very progressive country. It's wonderful, diverse people from all over the world, including me. But the only negative thing I would say about Canada is the weather. Although many people love the weather. Many people love the weather. Anyway, but we're fortunate to be here despite the weather.
Thanks, Manish, for the little chat, and I think we can get started. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I will be your host today for the webinar. My name is Amarjit Basra. I'm a chief scientist with OCP North America, headquartered in New York, but I work from North Carolina here in Research Triangle Park. So OCP North America has established a special group called Agricultural Scientists for Africa within the tri-societies. And what I mean by tri-societies is these are three societies, namely American Society of Agronomy, Soil Science Society of Agronomy, and Crop Science Society of Agronomy. So OCP North America is a corporate member of tri-societies, and under that, we have established this specialist group. So here is the mandate for it. It's a group within the tri-society, Agricultural Scientists for Africa, as I said. And this is comprised of agricultural scientists of either African origin, or more broadly, any scientist which is engaged in agricultural projects on the African continent or interested in its capacity development. For example, this webinar is also being co-organized by RUFORUM, which is an association of universities within Africa. You know, all of us have passion and interest for capacity development in Africa. Especially here, we are concerned more about agricultural research, innovation, and education. So this is a group. This group was kicked off at the annual meeting of the Tri-Society last year in Texas. We had a very good, productive meeting, and this year we are going, with more participation, and we are organizing a special symposium this time, which was actually selected by the Tri-Society based on a competition they invited. And this special symposium would be cross-society, across the three societies, across all the divisions of the Tri-Society. And the symposium is titled Excellence in African Agronomy. So, and you see the date, November 9, 2020. And this year, because of COVID, it's entirely a virtual event. And we are trying that being a virtual event, a lot of international participation can happen, including Africa. And those of you who would be very interested to join these sessions, please contact me or OCP North America, and we'll try that to enable your participation. So today's webinar is brought to you with the collaboration of Agricultural Scientists for Africa, joining forces with the School of Agriculture at UM6P, RUFORUM, and OCP Africa. And our, brilliant speaker today is Professor Manish Raizada, my friend and colleague for a number of years. So brief words of introduction about Professor Manish. Manish has a very brilliant academic career. He obtained his PhD from Stanford University, Stanford, right? And then after his PhD, he did his postdoc at CIMMYT in Mexico. And also he worked at Caltech in California, a very prestigious institute, where he worked with Professor Frances Arnold. She is Nobel Prize winner for chemistry in 2018. So you can see that, the trajectory of Manish's academic journey. So in his lab, he's now a full professor at the Department of Plant Agriculture in University of Guelph in Canada. And his lab focuses on a number of topics. A big focus is plant microbiome. And in microbiome, they are trying to find the endophytes, a big focus on endophytes that reside within plants or crops and help plant performance, either in terms of, battling with stress or nutrient uptake, water uptake, things like that. And also a big focus on rhizobial nitrogen fixation aspects of the microbiome. So that's a big focus of Manish's lab program. And he also alluded in our brief chat that low-cost technologies for sustainable agricultural kits, and also the extension, materials, training materials for smallholder farmers, especially in Africa. And other things is like he also specializes in coming out with diagnostic tests in terms of microbial biosensors, which can evaluate the nitrogen status of a plant or in association, things like that. So, and he teaches molecular genetics. So his PhD was in molecular genetics. He continues to specialize in that field, although research interests have broadened to other areas like sustainable kits for farmers and microbiome. But still, molecular genetics, he teaches molecular genetics and also African smallholder agriculture. So with those words of introduction, I would invite Professor Manish Raizada to present his webinar on opportunities for AgriScience collaboration within Africa. Manish.
Thank you, Dr. Basra. Thank you, Amarjeet. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. Let me first say I did have the pleasure of visiting UM6P in Morocco at the end of February, and I've interacted with the university for almost a year now. I'm tremendously impressed. You would never realize that this is a new university. The infrastructure, the faculty, the researchers are top-notch. If you have not visited or interacted with the university, I strongly encourage you to do so. It clearly will become a premier research university globally, and it's an exciting initiative. Today's presentation will contain a lot of links. I've tried to make it as practical as possible, especially related to funding opportunities. And so for that reason, I've posted the presentation on my lab website. I'll provide the link in a second, but I just wanted to show you that it's on the front page of my lab website right here. So you can click there to download it. So that's available now. Unfortunately, it's a large file. I'll try to compress it. I believe our host today may also be emailing the presentation out onto their email server. So one way or the other, I hope you'll have access to it if you're interested. So today I'm going to discuss opportunities for AgriScience collaboration within and for Africa. And I want to be humble about this in that obviously I'm not an African scientist, but I do have a passion to help African researchers and African smallholder farmers. So I've spent some time to try to be as useful as possible in this presentation. And because a lot of the funding does come from outside of Africa, I think I can potentially offer a perspective, both in terms of scientific funding and international development funding, on how to obtain it and the resources that exist out there, both in terms of grant funding, but also scholarship and postdoctoral fellowship funding. So as I mentioned, the presentation will be made available online, and this is the website, raizadalab.weebly.com. And I will also be posting this link again at the end of the presentation, in case you cannot write fast enough. So again, raizadalab.weebly.com, and it's on my homepage. Okay, so a little bit of propaganda about my university. As I mentioned during the chat, the university is located near Toronto in southern Ontario in Canada. There's New York City, there's Washington, D.C. It's Canada's oldest and largest university. It's ranked, it varies, but I think currently it's ranked number 12 in agricultural research globally and number 1 in Canada for inventions per faculty. And again, we invite collaborations. Here's the outline today. I'm going to first talk about the first message is that African crops are diverse, and hence the expertise that's required is diverse, and that means that one has to collaborate. I'm then going to discuss collaborators, and I'm then going to spend a lot of time talking about grant funding to enable collaborations, as well as scholarships and fellowships. And then what is the great opportunity and need for collaboration? So let me start with talking about African crops and hence expertise. I do apologize for our African colleagues. You can tell me much more than I know about African crops, but it's intended to provide an overview for the audience, which I understand is quite diverse and potentially in many countries. So a quick background to African crops. If some good starter readings, these are old, but these are free volumes called Lost Crops of Africa in Grains, Vegetables, and Fruits, and from the US National Academy of Sciences, and they provide an overview to about 100 crops in total. So African crop research is diverse. African crop research is as diverse as its crops. Africa has hundreds of crops and tens of thousands of land races for individual crops. And there are 2,000 living human languages in Africa, 1/3 of all the living languages throughout the world, subdivided into major linguistic groups. And that's what this map is showing. The reason I'm bringing that up is that each language reflects a unique culture, and every culture has unique foods, which means they have unique crop species and land races. So this cultural crop diversity also intersects with biophysical diversity, soils, microbes, etc. So if we talk about the biophysical diversity, Africa is the only continent directly centered on the equator. And what that means is that as the Earth, which is a ball, spins, what happens is, of course, the equator is closest to the sun, hot air rises, it carries moisture with it, and you have heavy rainfall at the equator. That moisture is actually being drawn from north and south of the equator in what we call the subtropics. And because the moisture is being removed from the subtropics, that's where we find the dry parts of the world. And of course, in Africa, we see that the northern and southern Africa are very dry. In fact, it can be deserts or the Sahelian region. So, you know, again, Africa is the only continent directly centered on the equator. So the center of Africa ends up being very wet, and the top and bottom of Africa ends up being very dry. And you have this diversity of rainfall patterns. By the way, you see this around the world, and again, here's evidence that Africa is the only continent directly centered on the equator. I always say that's Africa's blessing, but also Africa's curse, because it causes parts of Africa to be very wet and or very dry. And of course, very wet means there's insects and fungal pathogens. Very dry, of course, means it's difficult to grow crops. So Africa can be divided into moisture zones, which determine which crops can be grown. And you go all the way, if I start from the bottom here, humid, so more than 2 meters of rainfall in the dark blue areas, of course, let's say DR Congo. And then you have one feature of Africa are these sudden transitionary zones. So I've basically boxed the region of the country of Chad and south of Chad, And you can see you go from essentially the tropics to the Sahara Desert. Or you can even go within another country, Ethiopia. And Ethiopia here, the topology, because much of the country is in the highlands, but the edges of the country are in the lowlands. All in one country, you can go from essentially the tropics to the desert. And every rainfall agroecosystem, in this case, has unique crops or unique land races of those crops. And the point I'm trying to make here is that if one wants to work in agriculture in Africa, especially if I'm speaking to those people who are currently listening from other countries, from outside of the continent, one has to be aware of this, and one needs collaborations in these different zones. That's the point I'm trying to make here. If I just want to show you the influence that rainfall has. So I'm taking an east-west transect here, going from DR Congo, which is very wet, east into, let's say, Kenya and Uganda, which parts of those countries can be quite dry. By the way, the reason for this is that there's a mountain range here, the Rift Valley, and that alters rainfall patterns. It alters ocean currents and air currents. And that's why, although this is actually on the equator, East Africa actually is effectively dry for part of the year. So again, we're going from wet countries to dry countries. And so this table here shows the consumption in kilocalories per person per day of different crops. And on the left are different countries, but I've organized the African countries in terms of rainfall. Okay, so we could go from DR Congo, and what you see is that about half the calories are cassava, which grows very well under moist tropical conditions. But now if we go to a drier country, let's say Uganda, so further in Eastern Africa, you can see these countries are not that far apart. You can see how dramatically different the crops that are consumed. Okay, so now we have more plantain and we have sweet potato. We can go to Kenya now, or Zimbabwe, even a drier country, and we can see now the crops have shifted to, for example, maize. So this is a combination of rainfall, soils, and also cultural preferences. By the way, then we go into North Africa, let's say, or into Niger. We can see now the majority of the calories are coming from an extremely drought-tolerant millet crops, and also sorghum, again, extremely drought-tolerant. So this is sort of an overview, and it shows that one needs to collaborate across Africa or pick a region within Africa, depending on the crop that you're interested in. This is taken from a review paper that we've recently submitted on African crops. And so I'm showing you here in this map, in the legend here, crops of global importance that were domesticated in Africa, or climate-friendly crops that were domesticated in Africa. What one sees immediately is that West Africa is a major center of crop domestication. I would argue that West Africa is as important as Mesopotamia in the Middle East or Mexico, Central America, in terms of the crops that it has contributed to the world. So, for example, watermelon is coming from West Africa, coffee is coming from Ethiopia, oil palm, again, or one of the two major species of oil palm comes from West Africa, cowpea, okra, yam, sorghum, millets, etc. And if I can just show you a few of these crops of interest to our friends in Morocco at UM6P, is that pearl millet, which is the world's 6th most important cereal, was actually domesticated near southern Morocco. If I go back here, this is the area of domestication right here. So what we see, the source of greatest genetic diversity is typically the place where a crop is domesticated. And so the greatest genetic diversity of pearl millet actually is in this area in the Western Sahara. I'll quickly go through these. This is one of my favorite crops called fonio. It also is domesticated in the Sahelian region of West Africa. It's a very small grain. Why this is such a wonderful crop, it's not an important crop outside of Africa. It's a minor crop in Africa itself, but it's the world's fastest maturing cereal. It can mature in 6 weeks, and it's also highly nutritious. So that means that when farmers are hungry before they harvest their major crops, this crop is there to potentially alleviate hunger. And then outside the world, of course, coffee is one of the world's most valuable beverages, and both the two major species of coffee that are used for example, espresso and instant coffee, and then regular coffee that you can buy at Starbucks in Western countries, all of that comes from Africa, in particular Ethiopia. Coca-Cola, the original flavoring of Coca-Cola comes from the cola nut, and that was domesticated in West Central Africa. And rooibos tea, which is becoming very popular in Western countries, comes from South Africa and is only grown there. People may not know that watermelon and a relative that it's derived from, agouti melon, which are eaten for its seeds, also come from West Africa, and it's extremely drought tolerant. And again, that's where the diversity is. One of the species of okra, it's a minor species of okra, Abelmoschus caeli, also comes from West Africa, but it's really West Africa that popularized okra into the West, unfortunately via slaves, starting in the 1500s. Yam, which is eaten throughout the world, but African yam also comes from West Africa, specifically in the area near Nigeria and Benin in the Niger River Basin. And then Africans has contributed major cereals. Sorghum has become very important around the world. Teff is more restricted to Ethiopia, and finger millet came from East Africa, from Ethiopia in the Kenya highlands, but is also now an important crop in South Asia. But in particular, I bring these three crops up because these are all drought-tolerant crops, in particular sorghum and finger millet and pearl millet, and cowpea as well. And so I think, just as soybean has spread around the world from China, I think that these crops will be spreading around the world from Africa. And this brings up tremendous opportunities for our African scientist friends. I believe that you will see increasingly more calls for, more requests for partnerships with African scientists as the climate becomes drier around the world. And that is one of the reasons I'm bringing up this point. Oil palm is one of the world's most valuable crops. People may not know that it came from West Central Africa. Now, of course, is a major crop, especially in Southeast Asia, in, for example, Malaysia and Indonesia. Shea butter comes from the shea tree, again from, this comes from Eastern Central Africa and savanna. It's one of the most valuable crops in Africa today. Cowpea already introduced, an important legume, which is an important crop in South Asia, in the Caribbean, parts of Latin America. In the West, they're called black-eyed peas. And again, this comes from West Africa. And then Africa, I've just talked about a few crops, but Africa has literally hundreds of crops, many hundreds of crops, including leafy greens. Especially West Africa has a fantastic culture of eating leafy greens, which are important sources of micronutrients. In the West, these became, and in North America, these became collard greens. So therefore, there are many regions and diverse crop expertise. And so there's opportunities for collaboration. And I believe these opportunities will continue to grow due to climate change. So I've just briefly introduced African crops and hence the expertise that's associated with them that are required for collaboration. I'd like to just focus on collaborative opportunities here from kind of an outside perspective. Now, this talk will have quite a few pages that look like this. What I did is I spent quite a lot of time. I want this to be a useful resource to you, to be very practical to you. And that's why I've made it available online, and I hope it will be mailed to you. If for some reason you cannot find this talk, please just Google my name, and hopefully you'll find my website. But if you're still having trouble, please feel free to email me by Googling me. My email address is at the end of this talk, and I'll be happy to send this to you. So the first collaborative opportunity are seed banks. So seed banks as partners for African crop diversity. And this can help with omics research, for genomics research, for example, microbiome research, and of course, breeding. And I'm going to talk about the CGIAR in the middle, but here's the portal. What I want to point out is that one of the major institutes is located in Morocco. This is ICARDA, They have 130,000 seed accessions, especially for barley, lentil, faba bean, chickpea, and regional wheats. And I've listed the name of the head of germplasm, who's actually of Moroccan origin. The International Institute for Tropical Agriculture in Ibadan in Nigeria has thousands of accessions, African accessions of various crops here. ICRISAT in India actually is the seed bank for African sorghum, pearl millet, and finger millet, and they are required to share it with the public sector. CIMMYT, which is in Mexico, has the seed bank for corn and wheat, including land races for corn, for example. Although corn comes from Mexico originally, it has been in Africa for 500 years, and so that diversity is sitting there. There's the East African Plant Genetic Resource Networks, and then there are also domestic seed banks. For example, the Ethiopian Biodiversity Institute has a very large collection. And so these are all collaborative opportunities. I briefly mentioned the CGIAR. This is the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research. So their mission is to assist developing countries, including in genomics, breeding, and seed genetic resources. It represents, the CGIAR represents the world's largest partnership in agricultural research. Their annual budget is now close to $1 billion a year. And they do have some collaborative funding. Recently, for example, donor countries pledged $650 million to the CGIAR institutes to help farmers with climate change. So they are both a resource in terms of potentially funding, although CGIAR scientists are always looking for funding themselves. But it's an intellectual bank, people who are incredibly knowledgeable, very grounded in terms of the problems associated with their crops. And it really represents a wonderful opportunity. These scientists are trained around the world, and then they come to these institutes. So I want to point out, as I mentioned, that ICARDA, although the headquarters are in Lebanon, the other major site for ICARDA, it actually sort of has two sites, is in Morocco. It's not here. IITA is in Nigeria. Africa Rice is in Benin. The World Agroforestry Center is in Kenya. The International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI, is in Ethiopia and Kenya. And the point is, all these institutes around the world work with African scientists and with African seeds or stocks. And so these represent wonderful partners. And I've boxed the institutes that are located in Africa. Typically, these have $30 to $50 million budgets, wonderful scientists. And the ones that are not in Africa have research programs and field stations, especially for potatoes, corn, wheat, various tropical germplasm and dryland crops. And there's an interesting article here if you're interested in it. So these CGIAR represents clear partnership opportunities for African scientists, and if you wish to work in Africa. I've put on some links here where you can find these scientists at these institutes to save you time. Now, of course, the second opportunity for collaboration are agricultural universities in Africa. And people, especially outside of Africa, may not know the wonderful wealth of agricultural universities that are existing in Africa. Some of these go back 100 or 200 years. Ethiopia, for example, has a number of universities, Hawassa University, Jimma University, etc. And by the way, I'm sorry if your university is not on here. Oh, and of course, I've forgotten UM6P in Morocco. I apologize for that. That's an oversight on my part. But obviously, UM6P in Morocco, ESAFE, their agricultural division. But Egypt has many agricultural universities. Ghana has NUST in Kumasi. Kenya has had breeding programs for a very long time. Nigeria has many agricultural universities. South Africa, some of these are top-ranked universities. Stellenbosch, for example, is a top-ranked university globally in agriculture. Tanzania, Uganda, but many. This is not an exhaustive list. So the point is, these represent partnership opportunities. They're all online. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel here. Another opportunity for collaboration within Africa are the ministries of agriculture. And what I've found around the world in many countries is often the most grounded research occurs by scientists in ministries of agriculture. Unfortunately, because these are government ministries, often they lack funding. And so they would welcome partnerships, especially if you can bring funding to the table. But regardless of the funding, there's a tremendous intellectual resource there. So for example, the Ethiopian Institute for Agricultural Resource, I won't take you through these tours just because of time. In Ghana, the Crop Research Institute, etc. I put in some well-known ministries of agriculture, but of course, there's many others, okay? Then, in particular, because I have an emerging relationship with UM6P, with the Genomics and Bioinformatics and Microbiome group, I'm going to just devote a couple of slides to those particular disciplines. And what I want to point out is that there are growing collaborators within Africa in genomics and bioinformatics. UM6P, I will actually modify this slideshow to make sure I put in UM6P here. So UM6P is I think has now purchased the largest supercomputer in Africa, and they're going to link with clusters across Africa and personal computers across Africa. So they will have a tremendous resource for bioinformatics. Now, in addition, more on the medical side, there's a consortium called H3 Africa. H3 stands for Human Heredity and Health in Africa, and they've also built genomics and bioinformatics capacity. And then there's other links here. For example, I think one of the more exciting ones is that the Beijing Genomics Institute last year announced a partnership with the South African Medical Research Council, and this is being called the African Genomics Center, and that is coming soon. The Beijing Genomics Institute is globally respected, and so they will be bringing their capacity to this institute. Another institution I want to point out is Becca in Kenya, and they've been operating for I think 20 years or so, and they have expertise in genomics, bioinformatics, molecular breeding, for example, microbiology, research, computing. There's also other institutions around Africa as well in these disciplines, and again, so there's no point in reinventing the wheel. There's wonderful collaborators that do exist here that probably are looking for partnerships. I put in here two interesting articles of interest, one from Nature, the journal Nature, and the headline is this: the next chapter. It happened to be focused on Nigeria here, but the point is that African genomics is on the verge of becoming, I think, better known globally, and I think that's what's exciting here. The second article here is about bioinformatics in Africa. I also want to point out the African Orphan Crops Consortium as a partner both in breeding and in omics. They've created genomic resources for 101 African crops. This is located out of the University of California, Davis, and the World Agroforestry Center in Kenya. And if I just quickly go there, excuse me for a second, I just want to point out some of the crops that they are researching. And the idea here is they are obtaining full genome sequences as well as diversity amongst the germplasm of various crops here. So some of the ones I've mentioned, such as okra, but there's this huge diversity here of the amaranths. And some of these were domesticated in Africa. Many of these, such as, in other cases, there's just a tremendous diversity within Africa. And so that's why they're here. Watermelon is there, for example, taro, etc. So pumpkin was clearly domesticated in the New World, but again, there's a lot of land races now in Africa. So it's useful to have this. So this is a wonderful resource, and these are potentially wonderful partners. I'll go back to the slideshow now. Now, in terms of finding research collaborators, my advice, of course, would be to tap into the African diaspora, scientists of African origin who are now researchers elsewhere, partner with African scientists in Africa, and then together seek global funding as part of a network. And this is what many global partners like to see, because it's kind of at the correct scale. As I'll point out, some international development grants, some organizations like the Gates Foundation, in fact, sometimes they're not even interested in grants that are less than $10 or $20 million. They're not going to give that to one researcher, but they will give that to a consortium of researchers that are, and so linking for African scientists to link up with one another in a thematic way will attract more international funding, is what I have seen. And then, of course, one can use journal databases to find researchers who have published papers pertaining to your country, whether those are, for example, Canadian scientists or local scientists. Okay. I've just pointed out some plant scientists who are friends of Africa. There's obviously a very long list. I've just put out some few examples that certainly have inspired me. First and foremost, I would put in the CGIAR scientists around the world, and I put in some links earlier in the slideshow. I also want to point out IRD and CIRAD in Montpellier and Toulouse in France. They have had long relationships with African researchers in omics and microbiome and other areas. Alan Van Dens is at the University of California, Davis, and he's one of the co-leaders of the Orphan Crops Genomics Initiative. He happens to be actually a PhD graduate of my department at the University of Guelph. And others. Yves Vigoureux is very interested in France and African crop domestication diversity. Diane Saunders is working in pathogens in Ethiopia. Dr. Hihita from Purdue University is a winner of the World Food Prize, has done tremendous work in striga resistance. He originally comes from Ethiopia, one of the world's most famous agricultural scientists. Jonathan Lynch does wonderful work in root biology throughout Africa, especially East Africa and Southern Africa. Dr. Ken Giller led the Gates Foundation funded N2 Africa project to try to improve legume nitrogen fixation. He's an ecophysiologist. He's at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Just a few examples, but there's many around the world. And the point is, we know that these are champions for Africa. And so my humble advice is that there are collaborative opportunities. And for example, these scientists are very well funded. They know how to obtain funds. So one piece of advice would be to find a champion for Africa or for an African crop. They know potentially how to obtain funds from international sources. And so it's a wonderful resource for partnership. I'd like to now focus on grant funding to enable such collaborations. Now, this section will have a lot of links. I'm just going to focus on a few slides. But again, if you're interested, I encourage you to download the slideshow. So there is now some emerging African domestic or regional funding for grants, as well as scholarships and fellowships to foster collaboration. For example, from the African Academy of Science, the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Research in Africa, the African Union, which has an EU partnership. I believe they have about $20 million available, so not a huge amount of money, but still, these are good resources, especially for smaller grants. One of our hosts today, RUFORUM here, offers scholarships. There's the AFRIC One Alliance, Funds for Africa. There's also, I found these portals which have links to other local funding sources. The next opportunities are national science councils and agencies. So for example, national science councils in Canada or Germany. Now, what I want to point out, especially to our friends in Africa, is different science agencies sometimes have ad hoc programs that permit partner funding with scientists in other countries. The majority of the funding is restricted to domestic scientists, so for example, Canadian scientists, but sometimes they have these opportunities. And what I would advise you to do is to Google Science Council International plus country. And if you do that, so for example, Science Council International plus Germany, you will start to come across these agencies. So I've put in some links for Canada. So for example, Canada has currently something called the New Frontiers in Research Fund. And this is actually hundreds of millions of dollars that are being made available over a 5-year period. And Canadian scientists are allowed to partner with scientists from other countries who bring something novel to the table. Similarly, the European Research Council, the European Commission, the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, all of these have partnership grant funding opportunities. And so African scientists are certainly open to partner with these scientists. This continues on page 2. So Brazil, Denmark, France has a number of opportunities. Germany is clearly very generous, as Japan, as France. There's a number of opportunities here. Germany actually has many
Did we lose the connection? Or?
Those are considered typically often separate. So you may need a partner from the donor country. It's critical, I think, to establish relationships with that partner in the donor country before. If you wait, if you're just Googling and you now see a new opportunity from Canada for international development funding for Africa, you're probably already too late. What these donor agencies want to see are long-standing pre-established relationships. So, and one way that I, for example, set this up, I had a partnership with Ghana. And I set this up, I actually had traveled to Ghana, and I invited one PhD student to spend 6 months in my lab. There was a small scholarship from the Canadian government that enabled that. And that's what started the partnership, okay? So we already had a pre-existing relationship. We trusted each other, we understood each other, we understood our needs. And that is the type of thing that international development agencies want to see, because these are typically large grants. They do not want to take a chance and a risk. So they want to, and they often can be short-term grants, maybe only 3 years. So they want to see that a lot of progress will be made, and that can only happen if there's pre-existing relationships. So to my friends in Africa, what I would suggest is write to scientists that you're interested in around the world and start relationships. Don't necessarily start it based on a specific funding allocation. Okay. I would also say have a social scientist as a team member. This is very important to make sure you're going to make progress, and international donor agencies want to see this. Be gender balanced and gender focused. You need to emphasize the impact evaluation metrics, what are called M&E. There needs to be financial transparency there. Include academic exchanges and training. You do have to show that your institution is safe. The theory of change is critical. So good science may not be enough, but how will your science change livelihoods? And that's what I mean by the theory of change. You may need to demonstrate a scaling up strategy. You know, is this going to impact 1,000 people or 20,000 people or 100,000 people? They're interested in 100,000 or 1 million people, not in 1,000 people. Have a good social media presence so that donors can see you and your impact. It's surprisingly as important as good science to international development agencies, not to science agencies, YouTube, Twitter, etc. So I would start that now. Okay, make sure you can be seen in languages that are important for these donor countries, English, French, etc. I will warn you, these are often huge proposals, 100-page proposals, with a very low chance of success, maybe 1 or 2% in some cases. What I advise is maybe have a full-time or a contract professional grant writer on staff, or you can contract this out. People who are used to do this. You know, people do need to be good writers. You need to be patient for international development grants. It could be 1 or 2 years before a decision or the start date, but these are typically at least $1 million US. Sometimes, as I said, $20 million US. The N2 Africa project was $50 million US, if I recall. Okay, so some tips. Then what I've done here is I've put in a number of links. Now, the one point I want to make is that governments may have multiple agencies that deliver international development funding. So this could be development, a ministry of development. It could be a ministry of research or science. It could also be agricultural trade, private sector entrepreneurs, so that would be more business. It could come from a ministry of training in universities that offers or for science councils that offer scholarships or fellowships. So as an example, in Canada, which I know best, we have at least 4 or 5 different organizations which offer funding for international partnerships. We have the equivalent of our Ministry of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is called Global Affairs Canada. So they have international development funding. Then we have a separate agency, the International Development Research Center, which is specifically research to empower development, so not pure development. Then we have basic science, that's NSERC. Then we have entrepreneurial science, that's called MITEX. And then we have here's our trade international development, trade business international portfolio. And then federal government agencies such as Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada, the Environment, Natural Resources, they also may have pockets of money. So it is important, I think, to often at the beginning to find someone in that country, from that country, because Otherwise, it would be very difficult to know about all of this, okay? It often is not obvious. So what I've done here, just based on my experience and just quite frankly spending a lot of time the last few days Googling around the world, I've put in international development agencies that have a considerable amount of money. Some of these have billions of dollars every year. Actually, most of these, probably all of them on this list, have billions of dollars every year. Canada, for example, spends $5 billion a year in international development. And it continues here, okay? What I will point out is at the bottom here, you may not be aware that in your country, your home country, foreign embassies and consulates, they often have small pockets of money, small applications, and there's local decision making. So in other words, they may have $5,000 available, $10,000 available. And if they see really something quite exciting and interesting, you know, they can make that available, and that is decided locally. So there's no reason you can't approach the Canadian consulate in Benin. They may, and if you can make a case, whether for grant funding or maybe scholarship or fellowship funding, they actually may have some funds available. And so I encourage institutions, African institutions, to develop partnerships with consulates in those countries. Develop long-standing relationships. Again, don't just show up and asking for money, but develop those pre-existing relationships. Now, I also want to point out philanthropies. So those were governments, domestic governments. Now, philanthropies, I've put in a link here to the top 100 philanthropies globally. Not all of these are agriculture and may not be interested in agriculture, but some are. Each of these have more than 500 million US dollars. Some of these are worth 50 billion US dollars, such as the Gates Foundation. And I put in some other portals here that will get you to useful philanthropies. Everyone knows about the Gates Foundation here. What I will point out about the Gates Foundation is typically you can't apply to them. They will approach you. So if they have a particular need that they have defined, they then will look around the world and say, who's the best at this? This is why it is very important to make sure you have a presence online, and it is very important to form a pre-existing consortium. So that Gates, when, for example, they are looking to see, let's say they want to invest in climate change in cowpea. Well, if there's an African consortium of cowpea researchers, Gates can then approach you. And that's the point I want to make, okay? There's many foundations that have many billions of dollars. And so this is a wonderful resource. Then, of course, there's a few pan-national organizations that are funded by donor philanthropies and donor governments around the world. For example, the UN International Fund for Agricultural Development. I already talked about the CGIAR and the UN. Now, CGIAR and FAO don't necessarily have funds outside of their organization. Sometimes CGIAR does, but these are partnership opportunities. Then I'd like to talk about international funding for private sector initiatives. So more and more public international development funding is for entrepreneurs who will create local jobs, for example, in Africa, and hence not continuously rely on donor funding. These are separate from traditional funds. Large pockets of funds are available, hundreds of millions of dollars in for example, just from Canada. They can include funds for a university public partnership with the entrepreneur, and significant funds are available that boost trade, so bilateral trade. For example, the Germany Trade for Development Fund. So, you know, there is an opportunity here. If, for example, you're interested in a startup company, there may be a way to bring resources to your research program as well as to this company in a partnership. Philanthropies such as the Gates Foundation and others are heavily investing in private enterprises that have a social, environment, health, or food security mission. So some social good. Financial institutions, obviously, such as the World Bank and regional financial institutions, do offer money for startups. And of course, there's private equity, such as venture capital, angel investors, etc. Now, Oh, I'm sorry, this is a duplicate slide. I apologize for that. So I hope those links are useful. If we have some people on the line who are graduate students or postdoctoral fellows, or if you're mentoring some of those, I put some links here. You have seen this slide before. So these are some regional African opportunities. So they offer grants, but also scholarships and fellowships. Now, there are specific programs that enable PhD and postdoctoral PhD scholarships and postdoctoral fellowship funding to enable partnerships around the world. For example, the Humboldt Foundation, International Foundation for Science, Organization for Women in Science in the Developing World. Increasingly around the world, this has been a trend for at least 10, 15 years, international partners really want to fund female scientists from developing countries, especially from Africa. And so there are sometimes dedicated funds for young women scientists. Rotary International is an organization that many people around the world are not familiar with. This is particularly in Canada, in the US. They have chapters. So these are organizations where individuals come together. They have social interactions, but they also try to do something for their communities and sometimes internationally. So for example, in the city of Guelph, we have a local city chapter. They raise money. And so if you approach, for example, these local chapters and say, look, I'm a graduate student, I'm looking for $5,000 in funding. They often will fundraise for you, or they may already have a bank account with $50,000 in it, and you represent a perfect scenario for them to spend that money. And this is often an untapped resource. Biodiversity International, the Marie Curie Fellowships, often for women, IPCC, UNESCO with Korea, and UNESCO with Japan. Now, often graduate students and fellows in some countries don't realize you don't have to get one of these scholarships to travel abroad. So at the bottom here, apart from scholarships and fellowships, professors in Canada, the United States, typically have no barriers in terms of supporting international researchers from their domestic grant funding. Now, I don't mean that they can send money to Africa. What I mean is they can support you in their laboratory in Canada or in the United States. Now, however, international tuition may be double compared to domestic tuition, so that creates a disincentive. Now, for example, at University of Guelph, we have a program that started a few years ago for very good, excellent PhD international students. They have a tuition waiver so that the tuition is the same cost as domestic tuition. And similar programs do exist in many countries around the world. Also, international postdoctoral fellows cost the same as domestic postdoctoral fellows. So there is no disincentive there. So you can go to a laboratory around the world. You don't necessarily have to have your own funding. If they have grants, they may have their own funding. Now, I've put in, I want to point out that domestic science agencies in Western countries may have separate funding initiatives for PhD and postdoctoral fellowships. And I have put in here the links to some of those. For example, the Canada portal here will tell you about the specific scholarships and fellowships that are open to non-Canadians. And similarly, I've put in some select ones around the world. But there's many others around the world. These are just some. Now, a quick note about scholarships and fellowships. Well, I guess I already had this below. So remember, faculty around the world potentially do have money. Okay. So, but it is important to make these contacts perhaps 1 year or 1 year in advance of when you actually want to travel abroad. Because, for example, I may have applied for a grant today. I may not know for 6 months if I've received the grant. Once I have the grant, I would like to start, of course, using it. So then I'll look at my applicant pool and I'll see, well, who's written to me? So if you're on that radar screen, then potentially I could recruit you. But if you suddenly contacting me and are expecting, in 2 months to start your PhD, well, of course, I may have already spent that money or I don't have the money. You may be extremely well qualified, but if the researcher doesn't have money to support you, it will not move forward. And so here's some tips about this. Foreign students may or may not be eligible for scholarships given to domestic students. Point one. Second, international tuition can vary dramatically within universities, even within, for example, Canada. In University of Guelph, without a tuition waiver, international tuition is $20,000 per year. At other universities in Canada, it could only be $5,000 US. As I pointed out, there may be dedicated separate funding programs. Now, there may be funding at both the national level and subnational level. Canada has many provinces. So, for example, the province of Ontario, where I live, they do have scholarships for international students, and that may not be obvious when you just look at federal government. Now, you need a support letter from a potential new advisor. So start relationships early and be patient, as I pointed out. Some institutions have one deadline per year for PhDs, others have no deadline. So you can start at any semester, and postdoctoral fellows typically can start any time. But here's my most important point here. Send hard copies by mail in an envelope to potential advisors, in addition to email. The reason for this is that, for example, I get 100 emails a day, and typically up to probably 5 applicants every single day. So that means I'm getting thousands a year. And if you write to some of those, very famous scientists I talked about earlier, of course, they're overwhelmed by applications. So often what happens, and I'm sorry to say this, but often applications that we receive by email, we often, we just get so busy. If I'm getting, 3,000 emails a month, I just have to triage this. I have to prioritize which emails do I open. Of course, I prioritize emails from my own lab. My point is, you may be a very talented graduate student, a very talented postdoctoral fellow, but your email is not even opened. However, no one sends envelopes anymore with a stamp on it. And I know if I ever receive an envelope, I open it. I'm usually very excited. Maybe I might get one of the, I never have received applications by mail. Oh, maybe once a year I receive it. So invest the time in stamps. And my advice would be to I recommend sending envelopes to 50 or 100 potential advisors in multiple countries. And you will be more noticed. Your response rate will go up. Also, of course, send an email. And maybe send an email and wait 2 weeks. But then follow up with a hard copy. This is a good investment. Now, include a cover letter with your career objective, a resume, a professional-looking resume or CV, your academic transcripts, your TOEFL, IELTS language scores, and names of 2-3 referees. Customize the cover letter for each lab. So you have to spend time on this. It is critical. Everyone wants to see evidence for good writing language ability. Ideal but not necessary, suggest potential scholarships or fellowships. Obviously, we're all very impressed by publications in international journals and high grades. If you have high grades, it shows you have the potential to achieve, to win a scholarship. Maybe not before you arrive, but possibly after you arrive from the donor country. Now, sending these envelopes out, soliciting for interest, I believe is better than directly applying to departments. Because when it goes to a department, ultimately you have to find an interested advisor who has money first, okay? Now, please do not be discouraged by lack of response to emails. Again, recipients may never open your email because we're overwhelmed. So my most important advice, write to people, okay? I would similarly say to my more senior African colleagues, if you're not getting a response by email, it's simply, I hate to say this, it's simply because of your name. People may think you're applying for a graduate fellowship. So, for example, if you're a senior scientist or a professor, make sure in the email header that you're clearly stating that, okay? And you'll have a better response rate. Now, this is a critical point. How can a PhD student or postdoctoral fellow or faculty member meet a professor in another country? My suggestion, now, this is obviously difficult during COVID-19, but COVID-19 will end, obviously. My suggestion is to attend an international conference to meet professors. So look at abstracts, prearrange to meet with them at the meeting, or hang out at their posters. The reason I bring this up is because there is funding often. So for conferences or for conference travel, many science societies, American Society of Plant Biology, Plants Canada, American Society of Microbiology, etc., they have travel funds dedicated, especially to foreign students from lower income countries. So it is a good way of potentially meeting advisors, okay? So it's a good way to network. Now, last I want to talk about, so a lot of this was very practical, and they're meant to create these hopefully useful resources, very tangible resources that I hope you can use in the coming years, and not only today. But I want to leave on, I think, on an inspirational note here, which is what is the need and what are the opportunities for collaboration beyond what I already mentioned. So if you look at the population growth curve, the projected growth curve in Africa, most of the world's population growth, around globally, most of the world's population growth is happening in Africa, and this is something which is quite typical of. It happened already in Asia, and now it is happening for Africa. There's reasons for that. And if you look by 2100, really about 40% or so of the world's population will be in Africa. And I look at this as a big opportunity, as a major opportunity for African agriculture. There is both a need for collaboration and an opportunity for collaboration. Africa today, one of the reasons Africa was colonized is because of the large land area, as my African friends know, and how good many regions of Africa are for agriculture, despite what I said at the beginning. Africa has twice the per capita of farmable land compared to the global average. And many parts of Africa have a tremendous amount of water, which will be lacking in other parts of the world. So I think the world will want to collaborate with Africa, and certainly Africans, the population of African scientists will grow as the population grows. So there's a major opportunity here, is what I'm saying. Then I want to point out a couple of specific opportunities which I find exciting. One is that, of course, the Sahara Desert is dry, and there are very few crops that are grown there. I mean, there are a few crops. I mean, there are many crops in the Sahelian region, not so much in the desert, except for a few crops. But what I want to point out is that underneath the Sahara Desert in this map, it turns out there's a large interconnected aquifer shown in blue. It's quite a deep aquifer. But the point is, there's opportunities here to collaborate with engineers to bring this water to the surface. I think this was taken in the US. So this is also a dry part of the US in the western states. But they have irrigation. They have these pivot irrigation points. And of course, when it's dry, hot and dry, but you have access to water through irrigation, that's when agriculture thrives, especially high-value fruits and vegetables. And so there may be an opportunity in dry parts of Africa to create something very novel. And through collaborations with mechanical engineers or people who work on pipes, as well as with solar power engineers, and UM6P is developing a huge solar park, for example, to really power pumps to bring water to the surface. So there is a large untapped reservoir here for collaboration that can really, I think, potentially transform agriculture in parts of Africa. Another opportunity, has to do with water as the climate changes. Parts of Africa will become wetter, and parts of Africa will become drier. But if you recall, I pointed out that the region of Chad has these, and south of Chad has these sudden transition zones. The point is that, and you see that throughout Africa, right? You see it in Ethiopia, etc. So in a span of a few hundred kilometers, you can go from the tropics to a dry area. My point is that by collaborating with water engineers, there may be an opportunity to bring water from wet areas to the dry areas. And that, for example, is what goes on in California. And California has become a food basket for all of North America for that reason. Water is going to the deserts of California. So I'm saying potentially one can, and there's an exciting opportunity to collaborate outside of the discipline of agriculture. So with engineers, solar experts, etc., to really help transform African agriculture and help bring a lot of wealth to the continent. Other opportunities are perhaps more obvious. So other collaborative opportunities, and this could be both private public sector opportunities. So, opportunities to improve agricultural extension. So this would be opportunities to collaborate, especially with social scientists. Obviously, I'll quickly list them: improving low fertility soils, access to irrigation, climate change, dry season adaptation. crop pests, including nematodes, which are obviously very important in sandy soils in parts of Africa. Crop diseases, improved accessibility to inputs, high quality seeds, appropriate mechanization. So this often would be collaborations with the private sector. Breeding solutions to aflatoxin in certain food grains. Post-harvest improvement, improving underutilized and indigenous crops, creating markets for high-value crops, and improving veterinary services and vaccines for livestock. And critical will be value addition. And so a lot of wealth is lost from Africa because only raw commodities are often sold. So cocoa beans are sold instead of chocolate. Coffee beans are sold instead of high-value roasted coffee beans. Shea nuts are sold instead of shea butter, et cetera, et cetera. And so by agricultural scientists collaborating with food processors, et cetera, there is an opportunity to really bring a lot of funding for research to African institutions and a lot of wealth to lift up African societies. And, you know, I want to point out and in part leave that if Africa can engineer and build cities like this, like Abidjan or Gaborone or Maputo or Addis Ababa, look at the skyline in Addis Ababa, then Africa can also transform its research and its agriculture, its research capacity and its agricultural output. When I show this to my students in Canada, in fact, I show this without the names. I showed this the last day of class, and I try to ask them, where do you think this is? And of course, many people don't automatically guess that I'm showing them images of Africa, because the unfortunate thing is that many Westerners, their perception of Africa is a very poor place. There's television commercials and marketing for NGOs, charities that are asking, for us to donate money to support orphans in Africa. And of course, we know that that is true, but also these images are true. And unless people see this, they may not know that similarly there are wonderful scientists and partners in Africa at the PhD level. So I always, in my talks, I try to show these images, and here I'm showing it here. Many of you already know these images throughout Africa, but I want to point out that, Africa, obviously there is a new Africa that's emerging, and I believe all of my African friends here, there's no reason that African research can transform. And so as a final thought, African scientists living in Africa, I hope will increasingly be seen as true partners at the cutting edge of science, not only as conduits to resources, which has unfortunately been more traditionally the case. So obviously, often, scientists abroad are partnering with African scientists to gain access to germplasm or diversity. But I believe this is changing now. Some of the top-notch universities in Africa, UM6P is clearly going to be one of those. I think will help lead that way. So this is finally happening, and I'll leave you with this point: be confident. Be confident. Okay, there's no reason you need to think that you're not on par as the rest of the world. Perhaps you already know this, and it's simply a lack of resources in some places. But please be confident. This will and is applying to research as well. But today, what I talked about are that African crops and hence expertise are diverse, and one needs collaborations from across Africa. I talked about different collaborative opportunities such as the CGIAR and universities and research institutes and ministries of agriculture, etc. I talked about grant funding to enable collaborations, as well as scholarships, fellowships, and I hope I've left you with some potential topics for collaboration. But of course, my African friends could say much more than what I've said today. So again, this slideshow is available at this website, and I believe my host at UM6P will be emailing this out to their list. Now, I wanted to be, I was very nervous about this presentation because I didn't want to give the impression that I am providing, that I know more about Africa than my African colleagues here. So please take this from a very humble perspective. I'm just giving you my perspective. And what I hope will happen in the discussion is that the friends who are on this webinar, my respected colleagues on this webinar, will bring up their opportunities, or if I've made a mistake anywhere, will help correct me. So I want to thank Amarjeet and UM6P and our other partners here, OCP, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
Wow, wonderful, Manish. What a rich talk, and your last slide, the summary, the way you walked us through, the various centers of excellence that exist within Africa, CGIAR centers, the universities, the ministries, even consulates, right? So a lot of possibilities, and the biodiversity of crops, and a lot of things were new to me, the centers of domestication in Africa. And I think as we strive for agricultural transformation in Africa, so it may be a very uniquely African, in terms of crops. Like the Green Revolution happened for a couple of crops, and that model may not apply here, and it could be much more enriching kind of transformation or a revolution. So, and tremendous opportunities that exist that you pointed out for collaboration. And also, the role of UM6P as a young university, emerging hub of where, connecting the continent and the RUFORUM, those kind of organizations can play a catalytic role, in unleashing the potential of African research, education, and innovation. So with that, I really thank you for, assembling all these research. And it would be good to share your presentation with a long list that UM6P has, so that people can benefit from the resources that are listed in your talk, whether they are at faculty level collaboration or students to explore opportunities within Africa or outside Africa. So I think this is really useful. And I was also wondering, if there is a kind of resource that we already have, or maybe your talk and resources could be a starting point to assemble like a directory or something that UM6P or RUFORUM can put together with the help of faculty or students, so that we have a single source that we can compile to go to resource that we can look for various opportunities and avenues of collaboration. So
yes,
so thank you.
I think that's wonderful. If RUFORUM or UM6P could create websites. I first went looking. I think I already knew that there was not a great resource out there, and that's why I spent these last several days putting together. I really did have to hunt around the world, and I would be really happy if RUFORUM or other partners here could copy and paste all of this. And if you want any of my original source files, please let me know. Or if anyone listening today, I'm happy to send the original source files, the original PowerPoint, for example. But you have the PDF anyway. But please let me know if I can help in that matter.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we'll take some of. I'll go through the Q&A box and go through some of the questions we received from the audience. Here is our colleague, Mohammed Bolif, thanking you for all your wealth of knowledge. No doubt about that. Not only your passion came through, but the way meticulously you searched for the resources and the knowledge that you shared with us. And that can open up a lot of collaborations among African scientists and even with colleagues all around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Bolif. It's nice to see your picture here and nice to hear from you indirectly.
And he has also some questions, specific questions to Africa, which I will put here. So this is his first question. From your experience, do you think the African land races are good enough to preserve and exploit, or do you think they could benefit from some improvement? I think genetic or agronomic. Yeah.
Well, I'd actually be curious to hear Dr. Belief's opinion on this as well as a local expert. Well, I guess what I would say is what all land races need are some level of what we would call passport data. So, where is it from? That's critically important. So where was it isolated from? That ends up being very important, especially for breeders, but also for other omics and microbiome experts. So having some information to go with that land race in an organized form, that original geographic information, then if the local funding permits or partnership funding permits, then some sort of characterization can be important in terms of first. So for example, in today's omics world, we have genotype by sequencing, GBS, which very inexpensively, at basically for a few cents per SNP marker, can characterize the entire genome and then help characterize it in terms of the global population of that species. And that way, people can understand, where do those land races fall within the global diversity of that crop? So if that, I know UM6P is developing that capacity now, but otherwise it can be very useful to partner with someone who can do this sort of genomic type genotyping of the genome. And once that's done, then that enables breeding, because then people know whether this land race is already part of existing diversity or whether it's new diversity, in which case it may offer new alleles in a breeding program. So I don't know if I've answered the question. So 2 points. Geographic passport information is needed. And that passport information also ideally would have some local knowledge, so indigenous knowledge. What is the duration of this crop? Is it resistant to certain pests? Can it grow under low nutrient conditions? What is the rainfall tolerance to it? Those sort of basic agronomic phenotyping. And then the more molecular genotyping, all of that, I think, then that makes the land race very, it empowers the utility of that land race.
Yeah, so Manish, these uniquely African crops, you mentioned some of them, right? And you brought in the orphan crops. Although I'm not sure I like that terminology.
Right.
Could be a new crops or
right.
something
maybe underutilized, maybe or
yeah,
or potential. I like the term climate change crops for subsets.
Right. So they have the built-in resilience to fight extreme environmental conditions, but also in terms of the nutrient density, right? The yields may not be that high, but in terms of, much of our emphasis over the world in green revolution has been to maximize yields. And then we have compromised on crop quality, or, in terms of human nutrition. So I think that the nutrition, and a lot of these ancient grains have a lot of nutrition density. And probably that can be even improved to Professor Mohammed's question, right? Some of those germplasm that we have could be further improved. So any comment around that?
And thank you for pointing that out. I don't think I did a good job in terms of pointing out the nutritional benefits. For example, many of the small grains, the millets, teff, those are eaten whole, and many of the nutrients are in the seed coat, which often we remove from the larger grains. Well, for example, finger millet is incredibly high in calcium. Also, some of these crops have a wonderful amino acid profile. And so they are really important. And again, I want to emphasize that just like soybeans have gone around the world, I really firmly believe that many of these African crops in this next century will go around the world and will become major crops if they're not major crops already.
Yeah. So I forgot the name, but like for the fonio crop, there is a very high-profile chef actually in New York.
That's right.
That actually, you know that story. So he's hugely successful, right? And promoting those fonio dishes and the nutritional value of that.
And I should point out, if anyone here is doing fonio research, I would love to hear from you. I have a whole PhD student now entirely devoted to doing fonio research. So,
yeah. So there is another question from Professor Muhammad Bulif, and that is, what do you think the major crop protection issues are in Africa?
Well, so again, my colleague here, Dr. Bulif, will know better than me. We obviously know that there's, if I understand the question, whether it's, I'm not sure if the question is around the problem or the solutions, but so I'll quickly touch on both. The problem obviously ends up being, ultimately, if a plant is not healthy because there's not enough water or low nutrient soils, of course, those crops are more susceptible. And Africa's climate, unfortunately, in some places makes those plants just more susceptible. Sandy soils promotes certain underground microbes like nematodes because there's lots of air pockets. We know aflatoxins are a major problem for many crops in the tropics, as well as other mycotoxins. There's many pest issues, especially in the tropics. As you know, insects don't have proper lungs. They need a humid environment. And so constant humidity in the tropics promotes insect vectors that carry viruses. So there's so many pests and pathogens throughout Africa. If we look at the solutions in terms of crop protection, obviously, the best opportunity would be breeding. If you can breed for resistance, that's where partnerships, that's where taking advantage of the land races. The land races may have, some alleles that promote disease resistance. So breeding or integrating those into, multi-resistant lines, high-yielding lines represents, I think, the best opportunity as a solution. Beyond that, of course, there's opportunities in terms of the microbiome. There's opportunities in terms of chemical inputs. And there, in terms of chemical inputs, really, I think, my understanding is it's often access to information. So it's training. It's access to agricultural extension, which I believe is why I put that number one on my list of collaborative opportunities and needs. So it's, often, if the access is there in terms of inputs to pesticides, fungicides, or organic methods, so, good crop rotation methods, intercropping methods, refuge crops, permaculture. There's a number of organic methods as well. But often farmers, unless it's part of their indigenous knowledge system, which it might be, farmers are just not aware of them, or they're not aware of which chemical or the correct dose or the right time of year or the right equipment to use. So I would put number one constraint, other than availability, as access to information. So extension. It would be my personal opinion, but my colleague here may have other insights.
Yeah, Manish, going to the Q&A box, I see there are a lot of compliments coming from all over within Africa and outside, saying very rich information, insightful presentation. So people are appreciating what you have shared. So here is a question by a young researcher. You see that on your screen? So the question is, yes, visibility is very important for getting perfect collaborator. However, some young researchers like me find it difficult to make this aspect of our efforts known, strides known. Can you throw more light on this?
Yes. So one potential opportunity is to write a review paper. So show your intellect, show your knowledge by writing, for example, a mini review on your area of either current interest or future interest or emerging interest. Reviews become highly cited and are highly visible. And often international journals will, if you're coming from a lower income country, international journals will often waive the publication fees. You could, in fact, even do, many people don't know this, you can do pre-submission inquiries. You can only submit to one journal at a time, but you can do many pre-submission inquiries in parallel. So you can write to journals, say, are you interested in this review? And also, I may not be able to afford publication costs. Would you be willing to waive these costs? Excuse me. And often they will be able to. Of course, for better or worse, it's for worse, most of the journals of the world are in English, so you do have to be a good English writer or collaborate with someone, maybe as a co-author, who can help with that if that's not, if there are some weaknesses there. So that is a good way of improving your visibility. So that automatically improves your visibility. It shows your knowledge. You get an international publication. So that is something, and by the way, I encourage all my first and second year graduate students to write a review paper. It's advice I give to everybody. There's good evidence that if you publish early, your trajectory as a scientist really improves significantly. And the other is the one that I mentioned, which is, again, after COVID, try to get some travel funds and get yourself to an international meeting and have a poster at that meeting. Have a scientific poster at that meeting. Because then people will come to you. Okay, those are two glimpses I can offer. Aside from the most important thing, again, if you're looking for to potentially do research abroad, is mail hard copy envelopes around the world. Spend the $100 in postage. I know it is expensive. I know it's not cheap. I respect that, but it's the best investment you will make.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. It didn't occur to me that in this electronic world, sometimes that can do the trick. The mail, the physical mail.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, Manish, maybe because of your passion, maybe we can propose. May I propose that if you could be a mentor to some of these young researchers and students who are looking for opportunities, or how to get those kind of opportunities, either within Africa or outside,
right.
If you could be willing to help them.
Yeah, now what I would say is that, the best starting point is this slideshow, these links, and if there's something you think I can help with, I will point out that I have the same problem that everyone else. We're all overwhelmed. And I also have a young family, young kids. So I don't want to. I never like to overpromise, make promises, and then not deliver.
Yeah.
So what I would encourage you to do, please, if you can, get access to the slideshow. If you can't get access to it, please write to me. I'll send it to you. Please use that as a starting point. And also, I maybe should point this out. You may have, I'm speaking to the younger scientists in the audience, you of course may have mentors in your institution who have obtained their PhD or postdoctoral fellowship in another country. Use them as a mentor, because they can also provide advice. They have already done it. Okay.
Yeah, and another piece of advice I would like to offer. So the Tri-Society that I mentioned, the American Society of Agronomy, Soil Science Society of America, Crop Science Society of America, is actually reaching out under new leadership. They have a new CEO who really wants to reach out internationally to make some of the programs or activities that they do make very accessible. Of course, there is a membership involved. So I was talking to the CEO. He's very open, especially for people in Africa or others where students cannot afford to be a member, to waive off even the membership fee. And also in November, they will have this annual meeting. If some of you who are really keen, especially the young researchers or students, who would like, and we can avail the benefit because it's a virtual event this year, which could be more globally accessible. Please contact me if you really want to attend, and I would see that if we could make a recommendation for you to the Tri-Society that you could attend without any, monetary considerations. So please let me know if that would be helpful. So there is another question from Professor believe. He's very active today. Probably really inspired. So, but this one is more like how to, build a collaboration, especially funding a research project on cumin.
That's a very good question. So now cumin obviously is a high value spice. Well, my immediate thought on this is that if cumin as a high value spice brings benefits to especially local women, then I would maybe propose a project using that framework. So a research project that can bring income generation to local smallholder women farmers. You may be able to attract partners here. So in terms of international development. Now, the other angle that one could use is developing a broader partnership in terms of, for example, if there's interesting cumin land races or varieties. You see, cumin does have a lot of economic value. So this also could be, so excuse me, what I was saying in terms of partnership would potentially be to create a cumin consortium, both with Africa, but also Latin America and also South Asia, because the cumin is a major crop in all those regions of the world, in all those cultures of the world. So creating a global consortium and then seeking funding could be one way to go. And that could be based around breeding and population structure and genetics, genomics. So that then you would approach a science society or philanthropy, or you approach a philanthropy if you're focused more on smallholder women farmers, or seek private sector money, because it is an economically important crop that is sold by many spice companies around the world. And so if you're offering something unique, unique flavors, unique some quality, probably flavor profile or something, a unique supply chain, there may be considerable private sector funding available. So there may be 3 avenues there for cumin.
So Manish, this is a related question, same way. So this is in relation, oh, no, sorry, is it? No, okay, sorry. So this is in relation to quinoa production, it would be great to make collaborations with UM6P to develop quinoa production. Like these are all,
right,
specialized high-value crops and
sure,
how to build collaboration.
Sure. Well, I'll point out maybe 2 things here. One, I have a colleague, he's actually chair of my department at Guelph, who has a quinoa project. His name is, can I put in the chat box? Will they see the chat box? Or I'll just spell it.
Yeah, people who are joining from YouTube should be able to see. Yeah.
Dr. Hugh Earl. Earl is spelled E-A-R-L. So if you just Google Earl quinoa Guelph, or just Earl Guelph, he has a project he started, I think 2-3 years ago in quinoa. So I'll point that out. But of course, I'll point out that quinoa originates in South America, in the Peruvian region. And so an exciting partnership, again, to attract funding globally, an exciting partnership would be to collaborate with top-notch researchers who work on quinoa, for example, from Peru, from the source of genetic diversity. I don't know if there's a CGIAR that works on quinoa. There must be. I'm sorry, I don't know which one. It may be in Colombia at CIAT, but I'm not sure, to be honest. So I would say form a quinoa network, a global network. That would attract funding.
Yeah, thank you, Manish. So here is another one. I would like to know about internship opportunities for UM6P students studying agriculture at University of Guelph.
I think Dr. Amarjeet here and I have had some preliminary discussions about this, especially to see if there will be any dedicated funding opportunities, but we are still early in those discussions. I will say that there may be a short-term funding opportunity from the Government of Canada. If you follow one of the links from the Government of Canada that I provided, on and off, there is an opportunity for scientists in other countries to come to Canada for 6 months. It's about 10,000, so let's say about 7,000 US dollars available. That pays for your travel costs and living costs to come to Canada. So I've hosted, I think, 2 or 3 students through that opportunity. To be honest, today in the last few days, I forgot to check whether that opportunity is currently available. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. It's offered through the Department of Global Affairs. Aside from that, as I said, we've started some discussions about whether there may be some other opportunities, either at a postdoctoral level or at a graduate level.
Thanks. So Manish, we'll take the last question, and then if any questions have remained unanswered or people would like to ask, please email us and we would try to answer offline. And the last one would be, please could you shed light on roles of indigenous vegetables in combating micronutrient malnutrition in Africa?
Yes, actually, I'm working right now with a graduate student, and we're writing a massive review on exactly this topic, specifically with leafy green vegetables. It extends beyond Africa, but probably half of our crops are from Africa, especially West Africa. So yes, and I thank you for bringing this up. So if I just step back, the World Health Organization has identified 5 major minerals and vitamins, such as vitamin A, iron, folate, zinc, that are and iodine, that are critically deficient in human diets around the world. And what we see is that many African cultures have a fantastic indigenous, both vegetables, these could be leafy green vegetables, non-leafy green vegetables, as well as traditional fruits that are very rich in these micronutrients. Some of these are, in the case of grains, some of these are in the seed coats. Leafy greens are inherently rich in vitamin A. It's because it's the carotenoid light harvesting pigment, and often, for example, in West Africa, these are added to stews. Right, leafy greens are part of the cuisine with fish or fufu or something else. Similarly, in parts of East Africa. So I had just one brief slide about this, pointing out that there are literally thousands of these crops. I could have added that these are, thank you for pointing this out, that these are rich sources of micronutrients. And again, I think, and many of these are very climate change friendly, they're very drought tolerant. And I think these will go around the world. The amaranths maybe are some of the most famous because it's a C4 plant. So you can have multiple harvests a year. As many African amaranths as people know, my friends in Africa. So thank you for pointing this out. It will play a tremendous role. In India, still a large percentage of the children under 5 are stunted. I've forgotten the current percentages. I believe it's about 30%. And they are stunted because of micronutrient malnutrition. So what we especially need, and the focus of the review that we're writing, are indigenous micronutrient-rich vegetables that are drought tolerant, that can be used in the dry season. Okay, because where you see micronutrient malnutrition is in extended dry season. So in South Asia, you see it in between the monsoon seasons. In Africa, you see it during extended dry seasons. And so we have a lot of leafy greens that grow under wet conditions, but we need more efforts or more promotion or more breeding, more awareness of the indigenous African vegetables that can grow under dry conditions, or which can be preserved, dried, and can be consumed in the dry season. So there sometimes we need, again, either the world needs to be more aware of this, particularly South Asia needs to be more aware of the African vegetables that have good post-harvest drying qualities, or, and similarly with the Caribbean and other nations, and this will be more important as the climate changes, or we need more research into what is the micronutrient quality after those leafy greens or other vegetables are dried.
All right, so before we end, Manish, any last message or closing thought?
I would say, for my young scientists and my older friends and respected colleagues, I think you're in an exciting time. Africa is emerging. We've had the time of China. India obviously is coming up, but after that, or we're starting to see that Africa is emerging. So I see really glistening, shining laboratories throughout Africa. I see tremendous funding coming to Africa. It will naturally happen as tax revenues increase, as governments become more mature. What I mean by that is away from colonialism, which is still relatively recent, and as the world realizes what Africa has. We all came from Africa as a species, and now again the majority or a large percentage of the world's population will be in Africa. So Africa will be at the center of the world. As we see China today, Africa will be at the center of the world, and so African research will be at that center as well.
Wonderful. On that great note, it's my great pleasure again, Manish, to thank you for your time and such an inspiring and enriching talk. And I'm sure you will have opportunities to visit UM6P again, and I would encourage our young researchers and colleagues to meet with him once the COVID thing is over. And thank you everyone who attended today's session and participated in Q&A session and very informative discussion that has taken place. See you for the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll end the broadcast now.
Stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay safe and healthy.